Well, g'day everybody, and welcome to Brooklyn, otherwise known as the House of Pain, for the last couple of weeks. The only thing my rugby league career ever gave me was this knee, and topped off by the fall when we were out in Tuvalu in the lead up to the Paris gig. And so I'm sorry I can't be there tonight, though it's thanks to Jill, and whether this technology works or not. I've always said I've got a good head for radio, but it was a privilege to be in Paris, and it was a privilege before that actually to go to Tuvalu and to spend some time with the government and the people and our partners in PCP, and just to see what they're facing. And I remember on one occasion I had to go and do a phone hookup with Sydney, and went from the hotel across to this office where we were in, and it was all bone dry, and then came out about an hour later to see the entire area outside in the yard and the car park had been covered in about an inch and a half of water. And stupidly, even though we were out there talking about climate change, I said to the person I was with, some idiots left the tap on, and they sort of rolled their eyes, giggled and looked at me with great sympathy and said, no, it's high tide. And the beach was about 100 metres to the right, behind trees and past the grassy sort of area where there were houses, and but the water had come in at high tide. It had come in under the island and was pushing its way up through the earth. And at that moment, I thought it'd be really great if sort of Andrew Bolt and Alan Jones and Corey Bernardi could come for a walk 100 metres inland in Funafuti to see what the reality really was. So heading into Paris, particularly in the first few days, the occupation of course was on what had happened in Paris at the Bataclan and the great tragedy that had occurred there and the violence. And there was like a pall hanging over the city for most of the time that we were there. Hardened journalists would weep telling you about what had happened in their city. It was not quite the degree of security that we were expecting, but still fairly significant. But I tell you what there was a real resolve on behalf of the French, particularly the French government, to push for an outcome here. And they got an outcome. It didn't look too good at the end of the first week. But the outcome they've got is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. As Anote Tong said in Morocco, the president of Kiribati went to Morocco the week after Paris, and he said, look, this isn't perfect. It doesn't guarantee the safety long term for countries like Kiribati and Tuvalu, but it is a very good start. And I think strategically we would make an error if we said, we've got to make the quest for the perfect fight with the delivery of the good. And so what we've got here is a good outcome after 2 weeks of quite unprecedented consensus building, led, I think, very strongly by the three leaders from the Pacific. Tony de Brum from the Marshall Islands, who about 5 days out decided to cobble together a coalition, a broad-reaching coalition of over 100 nations to push for the 1.5 to stay alive mandate. At that stage, even on the first Tuesday, we spoke to Bill Shorten. He said, you'll never get 1.5, you'd be lucky to get 2. Now, the reality, of course, is if current levels, we're still probably looking at 2.7 degrees, which would effectively wipe out countries like Tuvalu and Kiribati. But there are hopeful signs that for the first time the world has said they want to limit emissions to 2 degrees or less, and with the aspiration to head to 1.5. Now that is a significant outcome. That's the first time we've got to that sort of point. And so that's a tick, that's good. Secondly, there was a commitment to loss and damage, and a commitment to say that poorer nations, developing nations are confronted with climate change, like Kiribati, like Tuvalu, like the Marshall Islands, need to be at the forefront of those efforts to provide assistance for early warning capacity, for emergency preparedness, and for recovery. That loss and damage is a reality, and that there's going to be stumped up in advance to that, the $100 billion fund from the developed world to assist the poorer world to cope with that. And also, this is another significant thing. There's 1 in 10 people on Earth live on a coastal threatened environment, on a low-lying area. So that figure alone, that 10% of the world's people are looking down the barrel of a pretty significant impact if nothing much else is done. So that was good. You know, I've heard people say that since we got back, oh, you know, but it's not all legally binding, so that's a problem. Well, actually, I think that was a mistake of Kyoto. So Kyoto made everything legally binding. You're in or you're out. So that meant that countries put in very modest NDCs, the sort of the nationally determined contributions that they would make. So it was sort of modest. So what you've got here is a commitment, a legal commitment. It is legally binding in terms of transparency and accounting, and the 5-year reporting, which was a very good outcome as well. That countries will be forced every 5 years to come together and say, this is what we've done, these are the contributions that we're making. And of course, over time, as the situation develops and, you know, it becomes blatantly clear to everybody that fossil fuel days are gone, then the hope is that there's a platform here to build on that to get significant contributions to be made. The other thing, of course, if it was made legally binding, you wouldn't have got the Americans on board, because the President could not have got a legally binding treaty through the Congress by having the legally binding components with terms of accountancy and transparency, and the push for 1.5 over the course of the next couple of decades, and loss and damage and all that sort of stuff. That can be covered under the Clean Air Act. That can be done under presidential authority. So it meant that the Americans come on board. And that was significant, I think. But I guess that's the technical stuff, you know, the 100 billion, the 5-year reporting timelines, the aspirations for 2 degrees and down to 1.5 degrees is where we want to see it happen. All of that stuff's good. But I tell you what was really significant, it was the fact that leaders like Anote Tong and Nele Sopawanga from Tuvalu and Tony de Brum from the Marshall Islands were able to go, you know, face to face, eyeball to eyeball with the most powerful people on the planet and stand up for their people and be heard and get the beginnings of an outcome that will deliver unto them. You know, Anote Tong was saying he had a conversation with a leader from a developed country, probably may well have been ours or North America or Europe. He said, hang on a second, if we do what you want, our GDP is going to dip. We'll have a fall in our GDP. And Anote said to me, what would you prefer? You know, your GDP falls a little bit, or we don't have a country and a people, a place to belong to. We won't survive. What would you prefer? And it was met by silence. But over the course of the 2-week period, you know, that began to trickle through to people, and it ended up with this coalition that Tony de Brum put together to put pressure on the major powers who were holding out. And usually that's America, the Saudis, the Chinese. And you got to a point where there was a delivery was made. Now that wasn't just the leaders of nations, it was the leaders of the issue. And that's why it was so proud for me to be able to look at the work that was done by our delegates, by Ray, by Sinai, Maria, of course, magnificent, Pula, Minor, who was in negotiations with the Tuvalu delegation. You know, to see Sinai and Maria and Ray stand up in front of the world's press, world's television, speak at forums in front of national leaders and not hold back. And not just speak from the heart, but speak from a point of principle in fora that were so different to the Maniaba on the main island of Tarawa, or a big gathering in southern Funafuti. I was quite amazed and very, very proud of the effort that they were able to put in. So congratulations to our partners, and if ever you need evidence of the fact that, you know, the role of PCP is to help build the capacity of not just our partners in the Pacific, but to put them in a position, or help assist them be in a position where they can be heard, then we get a point of mutuality. Because that voice of the Pacific, that authentic voice of what it's really like, is what's often is missing. And I guess it's part of our role is to help that voice be heard. And to that end, I want to thank and congratulate the ERC PCP team. You know, the logistical pull together that Narita had to do, the ongoing support technologically in terms of getting information out that the team in Australia, Vincent and Ellie, were able to do, the leadership, the vision, if you like, and the practicality to deliver on that Jill provided, meant that everything from booking up accommodation to getting people from the airport into the city at a time of heightened security went off pretty well seamlessly. Yes, we had a couple of hiccups. That's always going to happen when you're dealing with human beings in a difficult situation. But I'd say all up, a fantastic effort. And when I was a kid growing up, the match of the day used to be played at the Sydney Cricket Ground in rugby league for those who come from southern states. And the then great caller, his name was Frank Hyde, and Frank would every week give out the Seiko watch to the player of the match. Well, I would say, judging from our experience in Paris, that the player of the match, we did about 7 or 8 Seiko watches, because the team, both in Paris and in Australia, did a mighty effort. Our partners that we walked with provided a powerful witness to what the world needed to hear. And the national leaders of Kiribati, Tuvalu and the Marshall Islands helped build on that to create the platform that offers their people and their countries a way forward. So this wasn't perfect, but it was good. We can't make the perfect fight the good. And that gives us some hope going forward to say that you know, we are in a position now to build for something better. And that alone is worthy of a Seiko watch. Have a good evening. Cheers.